Just before I finish, I just want to also acknowledge that the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered, the Yagara Turrbal people, and pay my respects to our elders, both past, present and emerging. Thank you so much for having me. This is my song called Yugalii. So I grew up in Lightning Ridge of the Ualarai Gamilarai people, and this song is called Yugalii. It means place of song, and I'm really grateful I can share this with you. Thank you for having me once again, and I hope you enjoy your night. In my earthly dreams, home where I belong, the heart of my home, this place of song. The rivers flow to my soul, I feel the roots of this sacred ground. This land is my freedom, this place of song. Yugalii, 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 Yugalii. Dawanda gunima, winangailana, mayama yuluwiriba, walayamba bawali. Yugalii, 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 Yugalii. If you listen, you will hear the distant calling. Yugalii, Yugalii, Yugalii.
Good evening, and Gumba Daru Gumba Nani Gianindu, which is good day. It's good to see you in Barragum, which is the traditional language of the community that I grew up on the Darling Downs. And 2019 is the International Year of Indigenous Languages, and it will provide the opportunity for us to profile the significant work that the State Library of Queensland has done over the last 10 years to preserve, document and make accessible the traditional languages of Queensland. Later this year, we'll present to you 2 exhibitions that celebrate Queensland's traditional languages, but in the meantime, you can look at our website each week where we'll profile a word of the week. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vicky McDonald, and it's my great privilege to be the State Librarian and CEO here at the State Library of Queensland. And on behalf of my colleagues, I welcome you to this evening's Talking Ideas with Bruce Pascoe. But firstly, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay respects to the ancestors who came before them. The State Library is located on Kurilpa Point, which is a traditional meeting, gathering and sharing place for Aboriginal people, and we proudly continue that tradition today and every day of the year. I also acknowledge and welcome, firstly, our very special guest for the evening, Bruce Pascoe. I can assure you he is here and he will join us shortly. I also acknowledge and welcome the Honourable Shannon Fentiman, Minister for Employment and Small Business and Training and Skills Development, Greg Oliver and the family of Narelle Oliver with us here this evening, Jenny Stubbs, Coordinator of Book Links, our event partner for this evening, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community elders and members, and ladies and gentlemen, it's fantastic to see you all here this evening, and for the second time this week we have an auditorium full of people who have come to hear Talking Ideas, so fantastic. So, welcome to the 2019 Narelle Oliver Lecture with Bruce Pascoe, presented by State Library of Queensland and Book Links Queensland. The lecture was so popular, the venue across the foyer is also full of people watching us on live stream. So wave to everyone in auditorium 2 because they're listening as well. But before I go any further, can you please join me in thanking Kelsey Iris, a proud descendant of the Yuwalarai, Gamilaroi and Marawari people, for sharing her beautiful music with us tonight. The last song was called Yagalai, which means place of song in the Yuwalarai and Gamilaroi language. So thank you very much, Kelsey. As you came in tonight, you will have noticed some rolling images from State Library's online digital image collection. The images were taken by photographer and curator Michael Aird during the 1980s, 1990s and 2000s. And they are mostly portraits of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and include people from Brisbane, southeast Queensland, Woorabinda and the Torres Strait. And many of the images are from Michael's exhibition titled Everybody is Important. This week is Australian Library and Information Week, an annual celebration of the significant contribution that libraries make to our community. The theme for 2019 is Truth, Integrity, Knowledge, and I'm sure that you'll agree that these principles are very much inform the writing of our guest speaker for this evening. Tonight is also a celebration of children's literature, and we're going to start by acknowledging emerging children's writers. Mia McCrossan, coordinator of Story Links, which provides reviews and resource lists and runs writing competitions for Book Links. So Mia is going to announce the winner of the 2019 Story Links Short Story Writing Competition. Please welcome Mia.
Thank you, Vicky, and hello, everyone. It gives me great pleasure. This is only the second year that we've had the Story Links competition. Story Links is the review arm of Book Links, in case you were wondering. We had quite a number of entries, which were all outstanding in their own individual way. We had a short list of 3 titles: 4 Jam Tarts by Louise Little, It Was the Creek by Michaela Sanderson, and The Microscope by Genevieve Young. Congratulations to all the shortlisted writers, and many thanks to all those who entered. And thanks also to my co-judge, Sue Wright of Tiny Owl Publishing. It gives me great pleasure to announce that the winner is The Microscope by Genevieve Young. She couldn't be here tonight, I'm afraid. She lives in Gosford. I'm just going to steal 1 minute to talk about, as well as having a short story competition, Book Links now is offering a mentorship program open to Book Link members. And applicants are invited to submit a synopsis and the first 2 chapters, or first 6,000 words, of a work of fiction for either a junior or YA readers, or 2 picture book manuscripts. And the mentorship is valued at $1,000, and the mentor will be Robin Sheehan Bright. And the reason I'm saying it tonight is that it does close on the 1st of July this year. So get writing, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mia, and congratulations to Genevieve Young. So shortly we will be joined by Bruce Pascoe, who will give the 2019 Narelle Oliver Lecture. The State Library of Queensland is a respected cultural institution, and we provide a safe and welcoming space for everyone. Tonight's event is part of Talking Ideas series, which aims to entertain, inspire and foster debate, addressing issues that inform our times and shape our lives. Speakers at our events hold a wide range of views and come from diverse backgrounds. Similarly, there may be differing points of view amongst our audience tonight, but I encourage you to listen respectfully. Following tonight's lecture, Bruce will also be available in the foyer to sign books. But to introduce Bruce, I'd like to also welcome Des Crump, the Indigenous Languages Coordinator here at State Library. Des's family and cultural links are from the southwest Queensland, which is the top end of the Gamilaroi Nation. For more than 10 years, Des has coordinated and supported activities under the State Library's Indigenous Languages strategy. Through this role, he's made and continues to make the State Library's collections more accessible and discoverable for community language workers, community members and the general public. Des also works with schools and community groups providing education and cultural advice. Could you please welcome Des? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vicky. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians and also the elders and community members here tonight, as well as our distinguished guests and visitors. And as you've heard, it is the International Year of Indigenous Language. So Yamagara Nindali, Des Crump Naya, Murray Guria Duanrandidi, Garigole Gomeroi. And I know there's a couple of Gamilaroi speakers in the audience here tonight. I said hello to all of you. My name is Des Crump. I'm an Aboriginal man from Durrumbandi out in southwest Queensland. And it's my privilege to work here at the State Library, supporting communities in their language journeys, because it is a language, or a journey of passion, I should say, and it's very, very fulfilling work. Tonight, I'm here to, and also have the privilege of introducing our guest speaker and also giving you a little bit of the background to the Narelle Oliver Lecture. And my wife and I were trying to find a beautiful photo that we have of our daughter Emily in Kindy with Narelle. We have a series of Narelle Oliver photos. Unfortunately, they're on a hard drive that we can't find. But Narelle's work has touched not only our daughter's lives, but the lives of many young readers. And it's because of her stories and that memory of stories that the Narelle Oliver Lecture was established in 2015. Also to raise the profile and the value of children's literature and to stimulate some discussion around current research in children's literature. In 2017, with the support of Book Links, the lecture has now become the Book Links Lecture in Children's Literature to the Narelle Oliver Lecture in memory of Narelle and her impact on children's literature. And this year's guest speaker, as you've heard, is Bruce Pascoe, and he'll be talking about the importance of telling children the truth. And fitting in with the theme of International Year, in our language we have a word called Winanali. A Winanali at one level means to hear or to listen. At a deeper level, it means to know and to understand. And then it continues down until we have that understanding developing into truth and respect. And tonight's speaker, I'm sure you'll find, will have all those different levels of meaning and layers there. So tonight's speaker is Bruce Pascoe, a Yuin, Wathaurong and Tasmanian man born in the Melbourne suburb of Richmond. He's a member of the Wathaurong Aboriginal Cooperative of Southern Victoria and has been the director of the Australian Studies Project for the Commonwealth Schools Commission. He has had a varied career as a teacher, farmer, fisherman, barman, fencing contractor, lecturer, Aboriginal language researcher, archaeological site worker and editor. Something that's missed out on there, he's also a very good baker of traditional seeds, and I think for those people who've had the pleasure of reading Dark Emu, and you'll probably hear some of those stories tonight about reviving that lost art of those ancient grains and the amazing products they can make. For that work, Dark Emu, Bruce has collected a swath of literary awards, and he has recently published a version for younger readers, and as you've heard it, and probably seen outside in the library bookshop. So the next generation of readers will now have a chance to see Australia as it was before Europeans arrived. A land of cultivated farming areas, productive fisheries, permanent homes, and an understanding of the environment and its natural resources that supported thriving villages across the continent. So please join me in welcoming Bruce to the stage.
For at least 120,000 years, generation after generation of young Aboriginal people readopted the law right across the country, seeing in it its natural fairness, and decided to support it again. And with Kelsey singing to us tonight about the peril of our rivers, it's obvious that we're still doing exactly that with our young people leading the way. It's very encouraging, very inspiring to hear young people re-adopt the law. But I've got a real thrill for you tonight. This will be amazing for you. An old man reading handwritten notes off bits of paper. Some of you were born after that skill was lost. Unfortunately, this was written on an aeroplane, and quite a bit of it when it was landing. And if I can read it, that'll be another miracle. I believe in miracles too. We want the best for our children, as we want the best for our world. We want our children to wonder at the world, query the world, and contribute to the maintenance and betterment of society and conservation of our planet. There are some who see the world as a mine and their red carpet to unimaginable riches. They are few, but their riches allow them to interfere in the direction of the economy and planetary care. They are few, but they are dangerous. We want our children to succeed, but we don't want that success to be at the expense of others or to the detriment of the environment. We want our children to be kind, don't we? We want them to be happy, certainly. We desperately want them to be healthy, but we also want them to be kind and considerate, don't we? In order for this to happen, we need to expose them to the very finest thought and kindness of those who have gone before them. We want them to know us and what we see as human values. We want them to know their grandparents and uncles and aunties for a perspective on their position in the world and the journey of their family. But then we want them to know the thought of exceptional people who have made a contribution to the social, moral and intellectual development of the world. I think that's why my parents introduced me to the Bible. They wanted the best for me. I know they did. But they'd also sent me to school, and there I met people with other opinions, teachers who scrutinised the world from different perspectives, and they introduced that most beautiful of all intellectual gifts, doubt. The Pentecostal has no doubt. He is certain he has been chosen and that his way is the only way. I prefer doubt. Not constipation, not traumatic inaction, but doubt every day, wondering, a desire to balance the needs of all, not just those we see as equally chosen. I want my children to wonder at a world where the rich are encouraged to minimise their tax, their contribution to the world. I want them to wonder at bankers who cheat and steal. I want them to urge any child they come into contact with not to follow the path to riches if it depends entirely on deception, fraud and predation on the lives of others. I want them to wonder at chemists who sell products to farmers that they know will kill the soil, insects and birds. In Canada recently, I asked the learned literary societies I met why there were no birds in their cities. None. Why the Great Lakes on which they were situated had almost no fish, and those that were there could not be eaten because their flesh glowed with heavy metals. I want children to stand on the edge of the lake and query a society that lets that happen. I want them to be galvanised into action when they learn that their country's oceans lost 30% of its reef fish in the last 10 years, and that percentage is the minimum expected loss in the next 10. That is 60%. The fish, the Christian symbol. Surely any Pentecostal would be alarmed. Surely. As a child, my grandparents didn't have to think what to give me for Christmas and birthdays. They worked their way systematically through the Collins Seagull Library, even though they could barely read themselves. Get a book for Bruce, he'll love it. Other cousins needed more consideration and expense, but Bruce was very happy with the book, ecstatic in fact, learning to love that creeping intoxication of entering someone else's view of the world. Writers are largely dopey, inept and dreamy, harmless creatures. You might like to exclude Ayn Rand, Ian Fleming, and the man who wrote The Barefoot Guide to Making Millions of Dollars by betting on the corruption of the world's wealth division. But there are always exceptions. Amongst the dopes of the world, I read Jack London and entered his world of snow, adventure, and dogs. The beautiful companionship and selflessness of dogs. I read Steinbeck, who loved and cared for animals, who loved and cared for people. I read Of Mice and Men to every English class I ever taught. I said almost nothing about it, but lowered my voice and slowed my intonation whenever the moral dilemma was revealed. I introduced them to the gorgeous world of doubt and consideration, of care and love. We didn't analyse and exercise the book. Steinbeck had already said what needed to be said to any thinking human, those humans who retain a heart where many voters simply have a pocket. I read Ian Idris because I loved fish, boats and adventure, but I read Judith Wright's stories because I had learned to love doubt. I read Barbara Bainton because her world asked different questions. I read Lawson because from the very first reading of Faces in the Street, drifting past the beat of weary feet, I felt I understood Lawson. By the time I realised he lived on the Aboriginal frontier, but chose not to include any Aboriginal people, I was well versed in the scripture of doubt. I loved Patrick White from the first mention of scrolls of bark in Tree of Man. I was shocked to learn that I had been reading books from other places and became aware of how Eurocentric every utterance in Australia had become. I became a nationalist for a little while, but Carson McCullers cured me of that. By the time I read David Malouf, I was ready to wonder why his reference to Aboriginals was always about white people. By the time I read Xavier Herbert, I was alert to the fact that no Aboriginal person was capable of any action without the paternal direction of Xavier himself, always the hero of his novels. When I read Norman Lindsay's The Magic Pudding, I was charmed to read about Australian animals and wise to their addiction to wickedness, because I was living with my sister, a strange and deeply literate person, but on occasions blindly, unconsciously wicked. When I read Jack Davis's plays, Faulkner didn't have a theatre or a swimming pool or a library or a bookshop or a square of grass. So a teenage boy thrilled by doubt was more likely to read Davis than see him on a stage. Davis's doubt lingered and niggled. My uncle suggested skeletons and cupboards, black skeletons. He was prone to tall stories and a willingness to shock, but then, when I was working my way on his truck, he introduced me to very dark cousins on a fishing boat at Lake's entrance. I was dopey enough to consider their darkness the seep of marine diesel. Then Auntie Zelda stared at me one day, turned around and stared at me. I think we'd been watching the news on television or talking about it. I think it was Hawke promising a treaty. I must have said something really stupid. "Do you really believe that?" she asked after a prolonged scrutiny of my dumb faith in Australia. "Do you really believe that's how things work?" It was frightening. She was a joker, a prankster, and she loved me. She really did. She was grateful to have a chauffeur, a supplier of grass, not that grass, and a personal tea maker. We were close. So when she turned and looked so stern, I shrank inside myself. The rest of the afternoon was quiet as she prepared rushes for a fish trap she was making for me. Over the next few months, I was taken obliquely through the entire colonial history of Western Victoria, her crabby finger poking at the tender flesh where my own family was exposed in the tattered web of Australian history. Every Aboriginal elder seemed to have been given similar instructions. Auntie Bunter, Uncle Ivan, Auntie Joyce, Uncle Herb, Uncle Lenny, they all probed and prodded at my university graduate brain, insisting on hard-won truth and curiosity and doubt. Almost all are dead now, including both my book-buying grandmothers, but all of them are responsible for Dark Emu, which is not a work of genius. It's a work of love and care and patience, the love, care and patience of others. Dark Emu is a monument to doubt and the gruelling fight to shed the pixie tunic of Australian history. I was a grizzled adult before I stopped the Australian habit of pretending to be a pixie. I didn't come to it of my own volition. I remember being half ashamed of the Aboriginal ineptness and sloth described in our history and fiction. No, I was cattle prodded into this position of doubt by loving Aboriginal people. The gasping realisation of one's graduate stupidity was like stepping from an overheated room to the coruscation of the frozen air outside. It was an awful shock to become aware of the limits of my own inquiry. I had my curiosity and willingness to inquire saved by people who had never had my exposure to education. It is tragic to think how the myth of Aboriginal wandering and ineptitude pervaded the minds of our best educated citizens, and my saviours escaped the pixie mentality simply because they had not gone to school. Learning is a sacred act, and every teacher, librarian, politician and parent should be vigilant to its corruption. We cannot guarantee that everything we read, hear or watch is free of corruption or sneaking vested interests, but if we teach our children to be curious and inquiring, we will have taught them the skill necessary to monitor their own education. I should have been more curious, but I wasn't. I drilled my own children in the beauty and efficacy of doubt and seek to pass on that generous doubt to my grandchildren. I don't want them to be narcs and finger pointers, crippled by the responsibility to blow whistles every second breath. But when a coal miner who cannot pay his workers fair wages but can spend millions on attacking those who see coal as a bad investment, I want my grandchildren to say, hang on, you're spending our money to feather your own very big nest. When they see cricketers cheating in what is simply a game, I want them to say, hang on, how can you ever expect to play for your country again? When they learn that our inland rivers, thank you, Kelsey, when they learn that our inland rivers are so depleted by the requirements of a very small bunch of billionaires to grow cotton, I want them to say, hang on, what about the fish? What about the trees? What about the farmers downstream? What about Adelaide? I want my children and grandchildren to be honest and generous and fair like the vast majority of their fellow Australians. So how come we genuflect in our magazines and televisions in such servility to that minuscule millionaire minority who cheat and steal and pollute countries and minds? Doubt is beautiful, not in action, but generously thorough appraisal of our world. Thank you.
I hope you're not hiding behind me there. So thank you very much, Bruce. And Bruce has just very kindly agreed to take some questions, and we have some mics coming down the side. So if you'd like to ask a question, can I ask you to raise your hand and just wait till the microphone arrives to you? I can't see very well because of the lights, but if you'd like to put up your hand, anyone? Just over here.
Hi Bruce, thank you so much. I love your book Dark Emu, it's inspired our work. I just wanted to ask if you could tell a little bit more about your story between just your auntie staring you down and what you found in the Western Districts that made you realise you needed to tell a different story.
Well, I made a fool of myself many times, and all of those people that I mentioned corrected me very gently and obliquely, not directly, but just gently guiding me towards another truth. And with the Western District of Victoria, like most districts of Australia, unfortunately, was a war zone during the colonial period. And I had no idea about that war because I'd had an Australian education. And when I found out about it, not just the violence, but the names of individuals who were killed, I realised that I had to do something about it. And as I was saying earlier this afternoon, I then went to a library. I checked up on my own relations' stories. I was ashamed to do that, but I'm glad I did, in a way, because it led to a book called Convincing Ground, which talks about the war for possession of the soil in Australia, which Aboriginal people happened to lose. We were actually winning that war on several fronts in the Western District and north of the Murray River. We were driving people overlanding cattle back towards Sydney. The introduction of smallpox, and some writers say the deliberate introduction of smallpox by people who deliberately introduced it into the Americas, meant that 80% of some populations were lost, and you cannot conduct a war under those circumstances. So in the knowledge of the Yuin War and the other wars that I subsequently found out about, I was also finding out that facts about Aboriginal people that I just couldn't equate with the education I had, that I read in explorers' journals where I was looking for massacre information, and I found that Sir Thomas Mitchell rode through 9 miles of stooked grain. I was literate enough, as I've bragged about earlier tonight, to know that a stook was an English agricultural word. When I read Lieutenant Grey in Western Australia, he was thwarted in his survey by fields that stretched to the horizon in both directions that had been so deeply tilled that he couldn't walk across them. Once again, tilled is a British agricultural term. In Melbourne, many of the new farmers to the country were shocked to find that the hillsides had been terraced in the production of Murnong. Terrace, once again, is a British agricultural term. What stunned me was that after 200 years of education, none of those words had appeared in mine. I just think it's a stunning absence in our education system, in our social life, in our political system, and in our economy, that Aboriginal agriculture was so in evidence in the public record, but so absent in our education. I think we need to refurbish that. And the people, the unlikely people who seem most enthusiastic are farmers, especially farmers on marginal lands. One farmer wrote to me only a matter of weeks ago saying that he's now got more spare time than he's ever had in his life, and for the first time on the land he's making money, simply because he stopped using chemicals. They were the major line item in his expenses. He stopped using them completely, began growing perennial grasses, and started making money. It should be a lesson for us all. It won't happen immediately, but it's going to be a creeping agricultural revolution. And the only problem with that is that I hope Australia remembers who created it. And I hope Australia remembers that for all this worthy talk of closing gaps and improving health, education and job opportunities for Aboriginal people, here's the opportunity. If we fail to do it now, we've done it deliberately. When abalone was discovered by Japanese and Chinese people, Aboriginal people it had been a staple food on the south coast and elsewhere, Tasmania, Western Australia, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. As soon as it became a valuable item, because the British wouldn't know because they cook everything like a stew, they boil it and abalone turns into boot leather. So they were ignorant of the value of abalone until the Chinese and Japanese desired them. And suddenly the price of that fish went up enormously. It made millionaires of people, but the only people who never got a licence were Aboriginal people. So my fear is that we'll have an agricultural revolution. We'll be eating kangaroo grass bread, panicum bread, weeping grass bread. We'll be eating a bread from the flour of kumbungi grass, all the things that the old people made bread from. There's about 140 of those grasses and seeds that were used for bread making. I just hope that people remember where that came from and remember that for all the worthy talk of making sure that the economic gap is closed between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians, that here's the opportunity. Let's not declare it an abalone war.
Hi, Uncle Bruce. Coming across your research, did you ever come across how our old people keeping and caring for bees and farming bees, or keeping bees near Pacific trees for Pacific medicines?
I did read that both in Central Desert and from here, and it is in the manuscript of Dark Emu. But Mugabala Books had a terrific editor, still has it, Margaret Wiskin, who, when I was so excited by the fact that they were going to publish it after two other publishers had knocked it back, and that's a story in itself, Margaret said, there's too much in the book. There are too many examples. And that's the great thing. There are too many examples for the book. And I let go of those really reluctantly. You know, they were babies of mine, and I had found them and they were precious to me. Some of them I had wept over because of the insult to my own psyche of never having queried the education I'd had. I was ashamed of myself. So to let go of those things that had taught me so much was hard, and the bees are one of them. And I was thinking about bees today because I was watching on the plane, I was watching a parent reading a book to a child about bees. And I thought, teach your child well, because the bees have almost disappeared from Europe. And if they disappear, we disappear.
Thanks for coming tonight, Bruce. Just want to go back a little bit. You're talking about the Australian education system. I totally hear what you're saying and agree with you, but could you elaborate a little bit about why you think we've been educated that way about, you know, myths and lies about culture and history? Just your opinion.
This is really hard to do, because, you know, we have to talk some hard truths. I was reading through the explorers' journals, and it was very painful for me to come across those so-called explorers of Australia, the European first entries, coming across obvious evidence of Aboriginal people growing crops, harvesting, storing food, processing food. You know, the whole evidence of an agriculture. And I realised that so many people before me had read them. So many Australian professors had read those journals and had not commented on those things. So, was it an accident? Was it policy? Or was it deliberate? To contemplate that is to contemplate a really hard fact about your own country. We have to face it. You know, we have to have a better discussion between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in this country, and it won't be easy. It won't be sweetness and light. It won't be cups of tea and scones. It'll be hard won. We will bruise each other. We will hurt each other. We have to, because these facts are very, very serious, and they don't say entirely nice things about Australian education or society. So get ready for it. It'll be a bruising conversation. When the Victorian Education Department tried to make sure that the word invasion replaced the word settlement, they were set upon by the right. Australians came out of the woodwork to go on talkback radio, letters to the editor, anything, Facebook, the lot, to attack those who said that the entry of Europeans into Australia was an invasion, which it so palpably was. But such is the failure to review Australian history in this country that so many Australians feel that that is an insult rather than a reality. So it's going to be tough, but I think we can do it. I think we as a nation can do it. We'll be better for it. Our children will certainly be better for it. And there is so much we can do. And it's not going to be an impediment for us. It'll be our prosperity.
Bruce, those babies that you had to give up for Dark Emu that you could include in this book, is there another avenue on the horizon for this stuff to be written about? Are you planning to try and get that out in another way?
Well, I could do that, but what I'm thrilled about is I see young Aboriginal people learning all the time. I see some of them who are bound to be writers. I met Tyson Younger-Porter when he was a little lad, really, and a complete rat bag. But he's turned into a very fine writer, and his book is going to come out very soon. I remember meeting Melissa Lukashenko, who's in the other room, and I hope you're not ashamed of me, sis, that, you know, your old brother, with as simple a mind as can be imagined, having people clap. It's a bit of a shame job, but it's an indication of the fact that this great Australian story, which has always been here, the story of Aboriginal Australia, has always been in the land, and as luck would have it, as it rose out of the ground, I walked past. It's a complete accident. Blame my grandmothers. Blame those old elders. I was prepared for it. I didn't know it was coming. I ran into it and breathed it in like a giant secret. So it's coming again. There are other young Aboriginal people who I hope will do those things, because I'm a simple storyteller. I'm one of those dopes that I talked about before. I've got a collection of stories coming out this year and a novel towards the end of the year. That's what I am. I'm a storyteller. I think it's an honoured profession, but what thrills me most is like having Kelsey sing to you tonight her own songs. There are these young people who are going to change Australia, and I'm so proud of them.
Hi there, Bruce. Thank you for this book for children. I know many children I'll be giving it to, and I think it's incredibly important. What I'm wondering about is what we saw. Obviously, this is Queensland, and it's a challenging place at the moment. I'm curious as to whether what's happened here, this breaking open whereby a lot of people from the left and a lot of people who support more liberal causes were so surprised to find this nation and this state to be the way it was, to be as racist, to use that term. Do you think this is the time where we have the conversation in spite of the government, or do you think we're going to lose that opportunity under a Liberal government?
We can only have it in spite of the government. If we wait around for governments to have ideas, we'll be waiting a very long time. This is not to insult government. They just do a job. You know, they are there to monitor the economy and to rule over us, if you like. But if we wait for those people to come up with ideas, we're going to stand still, absolutely still. We have to come up with the ideas. We, the people, that grand term, we, the people, have to come up with the ideas, and we have to make those ideas become part of Australian life, and then the politicians will come on board, and then we need to have the good grace to say, oh, what a great idea.
Thank you for everything and the work you're doing. I'd like to ask about a project I heard about and read about, which is your Aboriginal tourism book, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Marcia Langton wrote the first volume of that, and I and Vicky Shukuraglu are writing the second one, which looks at particular places and particular events that are very important for Australia, hoping that we will take a real interest in them. And there's some archaeology going on in Western New South Wales at the moment, which I think is going to be very important in shaping people's understanding, not of Australia but the world, understanding how humans developed. Because on the south coast of Victoria at Warrnambool, there is a living site there that last year was found to be 60 to 80,000 years old, and the neighbouring living site this year was found to be 120,000 years old, which is quite a bit more than the out of Africa theory, which means that we have to think about how humans developed. Did they develop in parallel systems on different continents? What is it about it? But what that information and the information coming out of Western New South Wales means that we have to think not about our own history so much as the history of humans. These are very, very old dates. Other countries have nothing like it. A lot of human activity happened here. This is what we need to tell our kids. We need to tell our black kids that your people invented bread. but they also invented society. And we talk a lot about society and elections, which are peripheral to society really, but to make society good, well, that model is already here. And I talked about all those young generations of people readopting the law because the law is so fair, so generous, and so enjoyable.
Thank you so much for the talk. It's been wonderful. I just wanted to ask, in relation to what you were saying before about, the research process and how, reading through those old accounts by, so-called explorers, saying these things and realizing that they've been read before and, maybe, I guess, ignored in the past by, all these different academics and stuff. That can be really painful and, hurtful to realize that. And I was wondering if you have any tips on how to kind of manage that, all the feelings that can bring up for you.
Well, I think action is very important. After Dark Emu had been out for a few years, and I had people coming up to me saying what a great idea it was and what could they do to help and what could they do for Aboriginal people and all of that stuff. And I had visitations from government ministers and philanthropists and all sorts of people over 3 or 4 years. The only thing that didn't happen was money going into the company's bank account. It was all talk. So I sold a little place that my mother and I bought 30 years ago, but just happened to be on the Great Ocean Road in Victoria, and I swapped it for a broken down farm on the Wallagra River near where I lived at that time. And I started to grow those foods myself because I thought all the warm words in the world were not going to translate into actual assistance. So I had ignored my own advice in that I was waiting, thinking that those words were going to translate into actual assistance, and it didn't happen. So we all have to act. And, people often say, what can I do to help Aboriginal people? And I think the first thing is to talk to Aboriginal people, make friends of Aboriginal people, recognise the Aboriginal face in the street and share a cup of tea and have a conversation, because knowledge is where the good decisions come from. If we identify a convenient problem in Aboriginal society, like a gap in education, health, employment, or whatever, and we call in the army and call it an intervention, then we have failed our own intelligence. What we should be doing, if we see a problem in health and education and employment, we should be calling in teachers, doctors and nurses. And those careers are remarkably absent in most Aboriginal communities. And I'm not just talking about the north, I'm talking about the town where I live. The educational opportunities for those kids is improving, but it was shocking 15 years ago. Absolutely shocking. And those kids were being abused by the education that they were getting. And that's why I'm proud of Dark Emu, that information that is not mine but came out of the ground. I'm proud of that because now at least our kids learn to be proud of their culture, are proud of the law, and don't have to bend their knee to uneducated school teachers. So if something good has come out of it, it's the rigour of our young people in learning about their own culture and feeling proud, not shooting themselves in the foot because they've learnt to be ashamed. That's the thing that I really look forward to. And, you know, I've been working with the local community out on the farm that I talk about, which has been an Aboriginal ceremonial site in the past. And we do a lot of work on that land, but we also do a lot of cultural work as well. And it's a great joy to do that. And I think in this new agricultural industry, if we can wed the industry side of it with the spiritual side of it, it will be a great advance. It might sound a bit sloppy to some Australian farmers, but I think when we wed the spirit and the muscle together, we get a better result than just having muscle.
Hello. I'm really excited to read your book. Just got it.
I was bloody excited to write it, mate.
And I just wanted to ask, what are your hopes for this version of your book?
Children learning the history of their country. You know, Australians have been so badly educated in terms of history that it's kind of embarrassing. I think we embarrass ourselves in the face of the world. I used to be a tour guide at a Cape Otway lighthouse, and I enjoyed that job because you get to tell stories, interesting stories about that part of the world, which is an interesting part of the world. The people who enjoyed it most were the French and the Italians and the Germans and the Spanish, because they knew all about war, and they knew Australian history was a fake. They could see war. You know, they recognised war when they saw it, and they could see that Cape Otway, like most of Australia, was a war zone. And so I was able to have conversations with those Europeans that I couldn't have with my own people, my own Australian people. And the people who got exasperated and walked away from the group when I was talking about these things, 9 times out of 10, those people were Australians. We need not do that again. You know, I'm hoping that that book, Mugabala did a fantastic job with that, and there was a team of writers who worked on translating Dark Emu into the school's version of that. But I'm hoping that, you know, education and libraries are about the relief of ignorance, and I'm hoping that that will be of assistance to school teachers everywhere, and that there's no shame in ignorance, but if we refuse to relieve it, if we know it's there and refuse to relieve it, well, that is tragic. And, you know, we shouldn't praise ignorance. And in Australia, sometimes we pretend that it's an honourable profession to be an idiot about our country. And we shouldn't praise idiots. You know, it's such a joyous thing to learn, and we should encourage it, and we should respect it in our society and expect our social leaders to be learned.
So when Bruce opened this evening, he said he was going to give us a thrill. I think he's delivered. And certainly throughout your talk this evening, Bruce, you've given us a lot to reflect on. And of course, your books and everything you talk about gives us a lot to reflect on as well. You talked a lot about authors being dopey and dreamy, and I think certainly you're an exception to that. You're certainly not dopey. But I think overall, we are certainly all indebted to you for the work and the research that you've done, the fact that you have taken so much effort to research what the European explorers that you've talked about, but also to be the storyteller and to share that information and knowledge. And I think in a place such as a library, which is a place of knowledge and sharing and learning, it's been fantastic to have you here at the State Library of Queensland tonight. The last question referred to this book here, Young Dark Emu, which is due to be released in the shops, I think, on the 1st of June, but we've managed to secure some copies here this evening as well, so we do have them available. Bruce has also kindly agreed to stay back on a Friday night to sign people's books, so we'll do that following outside. But for now, could you please join me in thanking Bruce Pascoe for delivering... So, as I said, for delivering the 2019 Narelle Oliver Lecture. Thank you very much, Bruce, and thank you everyone for coming. Thank you.